This calls to order the meeting of the Budget and Oversight of Public Elections Committee of the San Francisco Elections Commission. Today is June 3rd, 2015. The time is 6:02 p.m. Can we have a roll call, please?
Chairperson Rowe?
Here.
Commissioner Jordanic?
Here.
Commissioner Paris?
He is stuck in traffic and will be here shortly. Item 2, general public comment on anything not on the agenda. No public comment. Item 3, approval of the minutes.
I move to approve the draft minutes.
I'll second that. Do we have any public comment on the minutes? No public comment. Any commissioner discussion? Can we have a vote, please?
Chairperson Rowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Jordanic?
Yes.
And the vote is passed unanimously. Item 4, alternate security plan. So as I understand it, Director Arntz, an alternate security plan is being proposed because of the sheriff running for election. Can you just give us a quick rundown? I appreciate the materials that you provided.
You're welcome. So the charter requires that when the sheriff is running for re-election, that the Director of Elections submit a alternative security plan to the Commission for consideration and approval. The charter doesn't provide any kind of criteria by which to frame an alternative security plan, but it's clear that the charter contemplates that there's no conflict of interest on the part of the sheriff as he or she is running for re-election. That also, operationally, the deputies work with the department every election to retrieve the memory devices from the polling places and to provide election security until the election is certified. And so we want to find a way to wall off the sheriff with this plan from any decision making and have any kind of impact on the planning for the election, but simultaneously still avail ourselves of the experiences and talents of the deputies to assist with the election until certification. So this is I think the third election where we put forward the idea, the plan to wall off the sheriff formally from all election activities and planning, and then place, in this case, his steed, the chief deputy who oversees their field operations division. In this case, it's Chief Deputy Albert Waters II, who we've worked with in the past for several elections too. One thing we want to do this a little bit different. In the past, the sheriff has sent me a letter saying, it was Sheriff Hennessy when he was in office, indicating that he would not have any involvement in the election activities or planning, and he would inform his folks. I get that letter. So I proposed in this, I placed in this draft plan for that to occur, in this case from Sheriff Mercurini, but then additionally for Chief Deputy Waters II to formally announce to his office that he is the person overseeing election activities as far as the Sheriff's Department is concerned. So that's what you have before you today. So.
I had a question about your footnote about other high-level assistants being appointed by the sheriff. Who appoints the chief deputy?
He's a civil servant, so he has to like the folks in our department, he has to take a test, be ranked according to his score, be invited to interview based on his ranking on the list of potential candidates. So there's a process outside of the sheriff's office which determines his employment, whereas if you're appointed, it's at the will of the appointing officer. So there's different processes involved here.
And how about his promotion and pay raises and so forth? Is that at the discretion of the sheriff? Do you know?
No, it's all based on civil service. So like I don't know what's his payment, the compensation structure, but for most civil servant positions, it's an annual increase in pay and also a step increase. So.
Have there ever been any issues at all in the past using this plan?
No.
And how you have the proposals, this sort of steps where Sheriff Mercurini is going to confirm this in writing and then there's going to be the announcement. Do you have a proposal to check on that and make sure that it's been done and take some action if it's not done?
I didn't put it in the plan. I can. I don't think it'll be an issue, but I can put some language in here. I can amend it.
I guess I'm trying to think of what that alternative would be if I guess we'd have to really take some emergency measures if one or the other of those didn't occur. But I think I would like to see at least that you will be confirming that those things have been done and that the process is contingent upon them confirming.
Yeah, and I certainly can do that, but I should say also, I have submitted this to the sheriff's office. So I've sent this draft plan for Sheriff Mercury to review, and also for Chief Deputy Waters,
Okay.
the second to review. And they've had no comments back to me about this, so.
And you also submitted it to the
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State. Did you get any comments back on that?
No.
Do you expect any? Do we have any other commissioner comments?
Yeah, I've got a few questions. I'll just start off by saying I think the plan's fine. I also appreciated the footnote about that his position is not like chosen by the sheriff. But since this is the first election where I've seen this type of plan being used, I just kind of had some questions out of curiosity. Like in your recollection, has there ever been another approach for the alternative plan?
We've looked, yeah, we've considered using, National Guard.
I mean, in the past, have you ever done anything differently?
No.
Okay.
No, we've tried to cobble together a plan that would be as effective, and really when it came to resources and cost, working with the deputies really was the better option if we could go that route.
And then in the charter, it says that there's a second scenario where you have to use this alternative plan. It's where there's a measure that affects the sheriffs.
Right.
Has that ever happened before?
Yeah, once, I can't remember the measure, I think it was around 2009 or 10, and then the ethics, then the sheriff's department actually requested that the ethics commission consider the matter. So then I appeared before the ethics commission. We went through it, and then they gave their, actually the ethics commission in that situation, I think, deemed that measure as not having a material impact on the interest of the sheriff. So I think there wasn't a need for us to use the alternative plan.
Okay. So one of the things too is you mentioned that you'd be forwarding the memo to the Secretary of State. And I was curious, have you ever gotten a response from the Secretary of State to that letter?
Not a formal, no.
Okay. And then do you have like some kind of a cover letter telling the Secretary of State what it's for, or you just forward the memo as it is?
Well, I emailed the elections chief in his office, and I indicate why I'm sending.
Okay.
Even also, then I followed with a phone call.
Okay.
To explain why I'm sending the memo.
Okay. And let's see. Oh, and one other thing. So like when the normal sheriff's plan is in place, we get to see the plan and like know the costs and things. And for this, in this case, do you think we'll get to see like the costs? Okay.
Yeah, no different.
Okay. And oh, and then also in terms of like knowing whether those memos were sent out, one thing I was thinking of, I personally don't care too much, but maybe I mean there wouldn't be any reason why the commission couldn't like see the memo that was sent out by the sheriff or by Deputy Waters, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right. That's all I have.
Do we have any public comment?
So since I hear back from you guys, I didn't invite anyone from the sheriff's office for this meeting, but you want someone at the next meeting,
I
right?
think, well, it's up to you, but I think that would be great.
Okay, all right.
So we can either have a motion to recommend this approval or not. We can have no motion at all and just bring it up with the full commission at the next meeting.
Well, I'll make a motion. I move that we recommend that the full commission adopts the alternative security plan, or approve this alternative security plan.
I will second. And do we have any commissioner comment on the motion? Any public comment on the motion? Hearing none, can we have a vote, please?
Chairperson Rowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Giordano.
Yes.
And the motion is unanimously passed. Item 5, I think. Item 5, open source voting systems. On this item, we have an invited speaker, Jason Freed, from the Local Agency Formation Commission. I believe you're the executive officer.
Yes.
And you've prepared the draft report that was submitted with the package, so please feel free.
Okay, Jason Freed, Executive Officer for the San Francisco Local Agency Formation Commission. We were tasked with this matter from a Board of Supervisors resolution introduced by Supervisor Scott Wiener to look at what would open source elections look like in the city and county of San Francisco as a potential option going out into the future. The high level overview of kind of the instructions I got from his office was kind of looking for a pros and cons approach. You know, we're not getting into the deep dive of exactly what would it take and all the finite details of open source elections and what's going on, but more of the high level, what is out there, what are the positives, what are some of the potential negatives of going open source. So in doing so, I was very lucky. This is one of our side projects that I'm working on, so it's not my main focus of my job. But I was very lucky to be able to get a graduate student from USF who did this as part of their cornerstone paperwork. And they did, Angie, who was my intern, did an amazing job of doing a lot of research and pulling together a lot of information, even helped write the draft report itself. So from a very high level, I also want to thank Director Arntz for all of his work and his staff's help. We asked a lot of questions, they provided all the information, wasn't taking any positions on anything, but was just giving us the information we were looking for from the city side as to what currently exists and anything that we should be thinking about for the report. We then reached out to a lot of other groups like Cabo and the Secretary of State's office. There are 2 counties that are looking at building their own system. There is some debate amongst some about whether they should be considered open source at this time, but they are definitely 2 counties, Travis County in Texas and Los Angeles County in Southern California, that are looking at building their own systems. When we talked with them, both of them said if they ever, they're still a bit of a ways off of actually having a functioning system in place, but both of them seem to give indications that they would share their systems with other jurisdictions. Not 100% clear exactly what that means because they don't have the systems yet. They haven't really spent all the money to do it. My personal guess is you'll probably see them asking for some sort of compensation for building the system if we're taking what they've already built and using it if we went down that road. So, you know, from a very high level, you know, there's still a lot of questions that are out there. There isn't a currently running open source system available for us to really truly analyze. So it's a matter of what would it take to get there. You know, we do have some pathways of how Travis County and Los Angeles County have been working up to this point. Those are very slow paths, just to be blunt about it. They've both been working on it for a few years now. Some could argue that you could potentially take what they've done already and expedite a process and move a little bit quicker. This is my personal guess, it's not really in the report itself, my personal guess is it's probably going to take 2 or 3 years to have a functioning system in place, because not only do you have to build a system, but then you have to go to the Secretary of State's office and get it certified, and there's only 3 companies that are currently certified. They're all closed source, one of which is Dominion, which you currently utilize. So now in some ways is a very good, if the city were going to move, now is a key time to get moving on it, because if you went on an expedited, quickest path type approach, 3 years is, you know, you're out of your contract with Dominion at that point, and so you need to be figuring out what you're going to be doing next and how you potentially either do a short-term agreement with somebody to continue the city's work or potentially do a long-term agreement, and then you're kind of closing off an open source system for a while. If you do a long-term agreement, you're stuck in a contract for a while, so you can't just get out of it so easily. So it's a good time for the discussion to be happening in the city and county to determine which way it wants to go in the long term. And so that's the very high level view. You have comments at this point. I'm mainly not looking to talk specifics about it because some of the stuff will change. It is a draft. I'm trying to get comments back from everybody. I've received comments back from Director Arntz. I've received them back from Cabo and some other groups out there as well. I'm still waiting for more comments to come back. So if you have comments, I'm not looking for the commission itself to do one big set of comments, because that's a collaborative thing and that can take time. But if individual commissioners wish to read the report and send comments to me, that's great. Ideally, I love getting the comments in a red line version. That's why I sent it out to everybody in a Word document, so you can send back red line. But if you just want to send back high-level picture comments or want to call me up personally and just give me verbal comments, I will take any version of the comments possible and collaborate them all together. And then after I'm done with comment period, I will then go back and review all the comments and make changes as appropriate to the document and come up with a final version that I'll present to my commission and forward to the Board of Supervisors, since this request kind of came from them originally.
Thank you. Let me just pause for a second to note for the record that Commissioner Parrish joined us at 6:15 during item 5 on the agenda. Thank you. Or did you have additional comments, or?
No, that's pretty much the high level view, but I'm happy if you have questions on, if you've read it already and have questions for me, I'm happy to try and answer them now, or just take the notes of what's been asked so I can incorporate them into the document itself.
Do we have any commissioner comments or questions?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of questions and comments. For starters, I thought the report was very interesting, very thorough, and it's a very interesting topic too, so I think both of you did a really nice job. Just for starters, is it for the feedback, am I correct that it's June 19th is when you wanted feedback in? Okay.
Feedback would be ideal by June 19th, but if someone were to tell me like, hey, I need a couple of extra days, it's not like a hard deadline. Like if you don't get your comments in, it's not like an EIR, environmental review process, where if you don't get your comments in on time, they're thrown out. If I get the comments in a timely manner, I will do my best to utilize them. June 19th is kind of a good spot, but if someone needs a few extra days, and I will be coming back and talking to the full commission, I understand, later this month, so I can get more feedback then as well. So.
Okay, great. As far as Los Angeles, do you know which individuals you spoke with there?
Not off the top of my head, but there were 3 individuals. We did a conference call with them, and then Angie did a few follow-up calls when there were some specific things that came up later in the process.
Were you also able to talk with Dean Logan himself, the registrar? Or?
No, I did not speak with him. I spoke with, there's a team that is physically working on the project itself, and so I spoke with the team members and not the version of Director Arns for them. I'm not sure exactly what his title is there.
Did you by chance ask if the LA County people, if they would be like willing to work directly with San Francisco, or do you get the sense that they're more interested in doing their own thing right now, or?
I get the sense where they're at right now that they're trying to build a system that works for themselves. If once it's built, they're going to be happy to share that to some degree. Like I said, it's not quite sure exactly how it's getting shared, but they very much seem like they're in their own process, and working with someone outside would only confuse the system, and they're already behind schedule, and so they're not looking to really add to that at this point.
Makes sense.
But if they did get a system, the only thing that would be missing from that system, at least in my viewpoint, would be the ranked choice voting, because everything else would be certified by the state. So I think that they would have, given that they are so large, that between all the various jurisdictions that LA County has to oversee, I'm sure they have every other type of system that's needed that we would need other than the ranked choice voting. So that would be the one missing piece that we would have to be able to add in. But if they're creating it in an open way, that shouldn't be too difficult to figure out.
Do you know whether LA County and Travis County are collaborating at all? Or
No, they're completely separate tracks, completely separate systems. I mean, partly, both states have different processes for certification, so there wouldn't. If Travis County did something, we could potentially take that, but there would probably be some work that would need to be done to get it certified in our state. Where if LA County did it, you would have everything certified but the ranked choice voting section.
So another kind of along similar lines, one of the approaches that the report discussed was the idea of working with other counties in California, and I was wondering if you had a chance to talk with other counties to see if they might have an interest in doing that. Like, for example, Registrar Tim Dupuy, Alameda County, if you would maybe consider asking him.
We hadn't reached out to any other counties to see the determination of interest in doing this. Alameda County would be probably the most likely person to want to partner with, because they're the only other one with ranked choice voting. And that is mentioned, I think, in the report that would be a good place to go. But we didn't reach out looking. This is more of a high level, are we even interested in going down this road? Because what you're talking about would be something where it would be good to collaborate, because that would be for cost benefit. That's definitely a positive, because if you got 2 people paying for it, it's that much cheaper for both sides. But that would be kind of what I would consider the next steps after this report were done. If the county wanted to move forward, that'd be one of the things it should do, is reach out.
So one thing I was kind of hoping the report could have done a little bit more is provide kind of specific, like actionable, sort of like a menu of options that the city could do in terms of next steps. Like, would the city need to like appoint someone to like lead the project, or issue an RFI, and like who would issue the RFI, and you know, like who would lead things? Can you maybe speak a little bit about that, or thoughts you put into that?
I didn't get into that into the draft. There might be some of that flushed out once I get all the comments back a little bit better, because I didn't want to get too depth into that side. But what I would say is, you know, the natural place to house it, in my mind, would be the Department of Elections, since they're the ones that oversee the elections. If it were determined that that would just be too much of a time consumed for them, the city could potentially try and find some other source. LAFCO does have some limited ability, although there comes a point if you're talking about collaborating with other counties, that kind of gets outside of our jurisdiction, just to be blunt about it. We don't do inter-county stuff, it's all internal county. So if we were doing an internal county, we could potentially do some more research and studying, but we don't have the authority to implement. So we could get you to a certain point, but at some point in time, the city and county would have to take over. Just to back up, LAFCO is a state authorized commission at the county level, so we are completely independent of the city and county, although we do a lot of contracting with the county, like all of our clerking and back office is done through the board of supervisors. So you see this interconnection and people think that we're part of the county, but the reality is there are some legal steps that separate us. And San Francisco is a little bit different. That most LAFCOs deal with jurisdictional issues between cities, counties, and special districts. Clearly, San Francisco being a city and county altogether doesn't have that jurisdictional issue. So we deal with only one small portion of LAFCO work, which is the special study side. We can review and analyze anything a city and county does, but we have no implementation or enforcement to actually get it working. So there comes a point in time when it has to be brought into the city and county. We can help get the city and county to that spot, but there's a certain line that we just don't cross.
Okay. Another thing that was sort of touched on in the report is this idea of maybe, if something was already built, maybe San Francisco could just build a part of something, or do you know by chance if an option, like could San Francisco certify a particular component of a voting system, or is it sort of like an all or nothing thing, like you have to have, like if we only needed like to build one thing, could we like just certify one?
I don't know how you would have a system that wasn't fully certified. I would actually yield to, since we have Director Ernst here, I'd yield to him if you could certify just one portion of a system and not have the whole system certified and still use it. I don't think you could.
I meant if like maybe like the ballot scanners, we'd use existing ballot scanner from one company or organization, maybe there was like the ballot marking device was...
So all pieces would be certified,
Yeah.
It would just be, they'd be all certified and then pushed together.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have to have the whole system working together, or if you can certify individual parts and piece it together, kind of Frankenstein style.
Can you finish your thought? 'Cause I wasn't getting that from what you were saying.
Well, that's sort of what I was getting at. Like if you could imagine like a central scanner could be used independently of the type of precinct scanner that's used, for example, or just more of just kind of brainstorming here, but or like so one case would be one approach that people are considering is having some kind of a ballot marking device, and maybe the ballot marking device could be certified separately from the scanners or something. So
Certified by the state?
yeah.
So basically, you'd want San Francisco to purchase a system from LA or Travis County and then add a component and get it?
Well, just in terms of exploring options, like if there were, like if we found that certain components were working, but there was like one piece that was missing, could you just build a piece and then get that?
Well, the elections code does allow for what's called a blended system. We actually have a blended system in San Francisco
Oh, we do?
because we use different versions of the main operating software, WinEDS. So the WinEDS that runs the ranked choice component is different than the WinEDS that runs the rest of the voting system. So we actually have we got to go back every year and get annually and get a conditional certification on a blended system in San Francisco based on our versions of WinEDS. So the code does contemplate and allow for the use of blended systems. Marin actually has different companies' components. So yeah, we could do that. It'd be, it's possible.
Is that easier or cheaper to add in that ranked choice voting component as it is to essentially wipe the slate clean with anything that's already pre-certified and starting from scratch with a system that definitely has ranked choice voting?
But different topic. That software, I think Commissioner President Drax talking hardware.
Well, anything really. I was talking about either hardware or software.
Yeah, I mean, you could add on a component to an existing voting system. If you're talking about an open source system, then yeah, depends on the license, I guess, too. The type of license. If you could add your own code, and also then add your own hardware components to it. But then you'd have to bring in essentially probably a big part of that entire system to the state for certification. So you're not really just certifying that one component, but you have to show that one component does not somehow affect the rest of the system.
And just from my perspective, those questions were more detailed than my report needed to get into. So I don't touch that area specifically. That would be something that would be looked at should the city decide to go forward. Say we're not going to go with one of the traditional vendors. We want to create our own. That would be what I would consider a next step to like start figuring that stuff out.
My question was more or less geared toward, and I believe it was in the same vein, but correct me if I was wrong, taking any kind of system that already exists as open source, LA for example, and just adopting a ranked choice voting option, and was that more feasible, more likely, cheaper than?
I would say if you had LA and they had everything else certified, adding on just a ranked choice component probably would not be that difficult to do and would probably be cheaper than going and creating our own. But just to be clear, LA has not created its own system yet.
Yes.
It is still a few years off. So I just want to make sure that's upfront, that you're looking at a few years down the road before we would even get a system from LA. And then we're not sure to what degree or how they're sharing it with us. Would be the other question. They claim that when I talk to their staff that there would be openness to sharing it with others. It's just a question of exactly how that occurs.
One thing I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about is, so obviously we're going to be proceeding with our RFP pretty soon. I think you said at the beginning of next year is probably when it will be issued. And so given that, like, could you talk about, are these things that could be pursued in parallel? Like we could have go with RFP in the short term, but in parallel be working on something that we could be using later on?
I think the city process would allow for you to do two parallel processes at the same time. I think what you would need to be careful about with your RFP is being upfront with people. Are you looking at a 10-year contract, or are you looking at a short-term, year-to-year, or 2 or 3 year contract? You know, what is you're looking for? Because I think that will impact both who's willing to bid on it and how much you're going to pay for it. If you're doing a 10-year contract, I'm assuming you're going to pay a little bit less than if you say I only want a 3-year contract. That they're going to try and gouge you a little bit more for that short-termness, and you know, you pay a little bit more per year, but you're paying less for the big picture contracts. You're not using it for the full time.
Okay.
That seems like a considerable concern to depress the people who are willing to bid on it in the first place.
Yeah.
Because there's not very many options to start with, so.
I mean, right now you
something we need to be
yeah.
really sensitive to, I think.
And one of the things that you could always do if you wanted to, and if you're doing it at the beginning of the year, hang on, I don't want to mess up any timelines, just stick to whatever timelines it is, but if you have time prior to that without having to worry about the election itself interfering with staff time, you can always put out like something like an RFI or an RFQ just to find out what is the interest, if we did short-term or long-term. Are people going to come back to us and say, no, we're not interested in short-term, we're only interested in long-term? It'll give you an idea ahead of time to try and figure that out. Or sometimes you don't even need to do an official thing. If there's only 3 companies, you can kind of call them up and say, what's your thoughts on this, and talk to them more kind of off the record fashion in an official government process.
Okay, I just had two more questions. So there were a couple of charts in the study. And one of them was on page, is it 18 or
I don't have
earlier?
to
Okay.
memorize that well.
Oh, on page 5, yeah. There's a table of, it's doing sort of a cost comparison of the current Dominion voting system.
Yes.
And it just has like averages to something like 1.2 million per year. But one thing I just wanted to mention is that there's also, I had the, something added to the agenda packet just distributed at the beginning of the meeting, which is, it's the resolution where the current contract was extended from Dominion. And
I'm just going to say I don't think I have it. I didn't realize you had distributed it, and I haven't had a chance to review it. So in the future, try to get those to us ahead of time.
Well, okay. So, I mean, it wasn't really necessary to read it, but really there's just, basically the point is that this document mentions that there are upfront costs to purchasing the voting system in addition to the year-to-year costs. So just wanted to make sure that the upfront costs are also reflected in the cost comparison.
I see where you're going with this. I can take a look at that, and
Okay.
if if I'm able to get the information from the department, which I'm sure I'll be able to get, how much the upfront costs were. The thing to keep in mind is whatever the upfront costs are for Dominion to do it, you're gonna have, if you're building a brand new system, you're gonna have some upfront costs.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
and it's unknown what the new system would look like, so it'd be kind of hard to do an actual comparison. Like here, right now, it would be hard to do a comparison. Say, here's what Dominion's upfront costs are going to be, and here's what our own system is. Because you can go off the shelf and you can think what you're going to need, but until you actually have built it and get everything certified, you don't know exactly what the final cost will be. So
Yeah,
we kind of stayed away from that. That was one of the things we did think about when we were doing the report, but the reality was there's nothing to compare it to per se. And we know that you're going to have to build something and pay for any new system. The question is, how does it get paid for? And one of the things that maybe should be added to the report as we're moving forward with the next steps and thinking about it is understanding that you're going to have to build a new system. The difference between potentially an open source system that is built and owned by the city and a private like Dominion type system is you're going to have two different types of ways of which you replace. The open source, the one that you can control, you're potentially replacing components over time, and therefore you can upgrade, and so you have costs that are more levelized year to year, where a Dominion system, you pay for it once every 10 years, or whatever, however often you're replacing it. You're putting all your money in at the very beginning, and then you've got your system for the next 10 years in theory, with some warranty and upkeep cost type stuff. But you replace it in big chunks, where the other system you're potentially replacing in pieces and parts as things get upgraded and updated, and you want to say change something, you can upgrade accordingly, and you're not having to buy an entire new system each time. So it's a different style and a different way of thinking that could be good or bad depending on the types of parts that you're buying for your own system and how long they're scheduled to last.
And also on that point, so just because the old contract or the current contract or the current system costs a certain amount, was paid for in a certain way, doesn't mean that the new contract, the new system will follow suit. So you can't depend on looking in the past to draw your cost comparisons.
Yeah, it's more just that for readers of the document that it's not just the annual maintenance fee that contributes to a cost. That's all. It's more.
You're looking to just to acknowledge that there's an upfront cost for purchasing a system.
Yeah.
That's all paid for in a certain way that could change with a new contract. You can make it so you're paying over 10 years rather than
Could be a lease.
Or it could be a lease.
Yeah.
So which would be a drastically different set of numbers than half of that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, that's a
Understood.
good point.
Understood. So and then lastly, Director Aaron, so I was wondering if maybe you can comment on the report and what you how you view things and whether this is something that is it something that the department could do or just any sort of feedback you have on things?
That's a big question.
Well, it's it's one open-ended.
I mean, so Jason's put a lot of time into it, but as you notice, things not done yet. So a lot of ground's been covered on this first draft. So I don't really want to talk about this version of it because there will be changes coming forward. I think there's still a lot of facts that have to be brought forward and clarified right now. I think open source itself, as far as other jurisdictions is concerned, isn't defined. I think open source is being thrown around too liberally. I think the licensing issue with anything that is built under open source is a significant issue that hasn't really been addressed whatsoever. As far as the department creating a voting system, LA planned by now to have its system already implemented. They're just now getting into the point where they're going to design the system, and I think they're 8 years into it.
Something like that.
And they have far more resources than we do. We're right now entering our busiest election cycle, so it depends on timing, really. Also, my concern is that there's so much focus on the idea of open source. Maybe there are systems that come close to open source to provide much broader services than the current system does that we don't have even realized yet to compare against the idea of an open source system. So I think right now things are really too much up in the air for me to have any sort of plan in place or to advise on a plan. I think Jason's report is a good first step. I think a lot of conversation has to take place on this idea of developing an open source system. I think also we have to consider the potential benefits of drawing from a vendor providing a system as well, you know, because us starting from scratch, if we're borrowing from another jurisdiction or jumping in late, may not provide the same level of functionality as we could receive from someone who's been in business for a long time.
Could you mention a couple of the things that you thought could be fleshed out a little bit more or clarified in terms of, you mentioned some things?
Well, you know, one thing I think needs to be established is what does an open source voting system mean to you? What's it mean to you? You know, what's it mean to you? What's it mean to whoever? Because it seems like it changes every time there's a conversation about open source. The type of system that people are talking about changes, not just from session to session, but from person to person within the same conversation. So I think that's the one thing that has to happen is what is open source. One key point in the report, in the draft, is the licensing. What level of licensing will be attached to any open source system that potentially is built or joined by San Francisco? The general public license is GPL, is that what it is? To me, that'd be a horrible idea. Why is San Francisco spend potentially $18 million, let's say, using the OSIT figure that's put out there, for GPL, and then essentially give away all that knowledge? That makes no sense whatsoever, you know. And then, so that, to me, I don't get. So I think the licensing is an issue. Is San Francisco going to own it? Are we just going to share it with everyone else? There's a lot of control that has to go around the open source. So what is open source? What do people mean by open source? You know, and really, in the end, what is the distinction of an open source voting system compared to, I guess you'd call it a legacy system? Because you still have to. One idea, I think it was in the report, is that one idea is to frame the hardware first, then write the software. Right there, you're creating your own legacy system, you know, because you have your hardware, which is static. You create the software to apply, to run this hardware. By the time the system is tested and certified, how many years have gone by? So the very same complaint that we have against the current voting system or other vendor systems that it's outdated, is going to apply to an open source system as soon as it comes on the market.
That's the LA County, that's how LA County's doing it.
Yeah, I'll tell you anything about that.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, perfect.
That is the LA County version.
Okay. So yeah, so really the idea is what is open source to us and how is it going to apply this situation? If this, one thing I will state, I think will be consistent in every statement I make about this scenario, is that if the city's willing to upgrade its voting technology now, I don't want to wait 10, 20 years down the road to make it happen for the perfect system. If something can walk in the door that's applicable to our realities, that's, you know, it meets security requirements, it's flexible, it reports open data in open file formats, you know, then let's consider that seriously. Let's not put everything on hold, wait for the perfect system to show up. And that's a real concern that I have with the open source conversation. The system we have is old. You know, it's based on, you know, the memory packs we have are less than a megabyte of memory capacity, you know, which is ridiculous. Well, we can't change that because it would, you know, take an act of God to get certified and to make the changes. But I don't want to, and that's what happened when we went to the system, is that in 2005, the department issued an RFP for a voting system. It wasn't until 2008 when that system got implemented. So we went through all the process and we were done by mid-2006, I think it was, to implement. And it took us literally 3 years to go through the process of getting a voting system. First it was ranked choice voting. The people that supported ranked choice voting were concerned that the current system wouldn't run ranked choice voting, wouldn't be developed for ranked choice voting, or wouldn't run it properly. So it took a year. Then it was the open source. We couldn't approve this and execute the contract for the system because it wasn't open source. So we waited 2.5 years to get the system, to get the contract executed, to get the system brought in, implemented in San Francisco. And we're using even older technology. We're waiting to bring in this technology. And I can't tell you one thing for elections. All the best ideas in the world are great, but you can't run an election on an idea. You got to have stuff in hand to run an election. And it was really difficult and challenging for the department to rely on a system, that it was definitely dying, as we were using it. And then think that potentially, because of open source is back in the conversation again, that there's better equipment out there, there's better processes, there's better software, it's more secure, it's more flexible. We can't touch it because we're gonna go for the perfect open source system. That's a huge concern that I have.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is my personal opinion, but I don't see anything wrong with pursuing something that we need now, and then in parallel exploring this other path. I mean, which it seems like something that would address that concern, where we move forward. But it's just my own thought.
And everything I just said is not against that idea. It just has to be clear that that's the approach, and then I think also you can learn from the next system that comes into San Francisco,
Yeah.
because what we have now is not flexible.
I agree with you.
So,
Speaking of that flexibility, I know that our system is old, and I know that we want to replace it for various reasons, such as the one made by cards. But are there any hard stops? Is there a certain stock of memory cards or casings, readers that we're running out of, that we definitely know that once we get to a certain point where X machine fails or Y supply of this certain item goes, we are going to be in trouble?
I don't have that answer, because it's not my universe, but I will say that, so I went to Denver for their election in the beginning of May, and then I went 2 weeks later to Alameda for an election that they held for a state senate, I think it was. We contract out, that's one of the costs that you're seeing in this report. Our costs are higher than a lot of other jurisdictions because I framed the contract to require the vendor to provide the heavy lifting when it came to support, because I didn't trust the city to step forward, one, to provide personnel, because we were a temp as needed department for more than 10 years. I didn't even trust that we'd have funding for personnel, much less that we provided funding for voting equipment repairs. So I built into the contract, into the election services, the maintenance, that the vendor would take care of our system. So the onus is on the vendor to find the pieces to keep the machines running. Alameda, they've got a warehouse full of equipment that came from where? Denver. Because they're cannibalizing the machines, because they're having a hard time funding replacement parts for the very same system that we're using in San Francisco. So I don't know when the moment of extinction occurs, but it seems like it might be on the horizon at some point.
Later.
Right.
I think it really is an important point that you have a long time horizon to make change. You can't just turn on a dime. And
Right.
so I think that point needs to be made early and often, that there's a lot of support for open source. The technology doesn't exist right now. The folks who've been trying to do it, it has taken them a heck of a lot longer than they thought it would, and we still don't know whether they're going to come up with a system that passes muster. So I think we do need to reiterate that point to the folks who are making the decisions about this, that whatever we think about open source, and I think people are generally favorable to it, I think you as well, if I'm understanding correctly, that can't be the enemy of giving you a system that works
Right.
over the next few years, because you don't have the time. You're not that. When you talk about flexibility, you can't operate quickly. You have a lot of procedures that you need to go through. You got a lot of training. You got a lot of different interests that step in, and I appreciate you making that point, and I think we can all play a part in making sure that that's not overlooked in this. Not to be the enemy of open source, like you said. We're all, we seem to all be very much in favor of that, but it doesn't exist yet, and you can't rely upon a future that unless you know with certainty that it's going to be there on a certain date. So,
Well said.
important point.
Right.
I wanted to ask, if I may, you mentioned, first of all, I wanted to thank the director for working with you on the report. I thought the report was really helpful, very informative in plain English. I do think it would be helpful to explain to non-tech folks, what do we mean by open source? Or what is, maybe there's a debate about that, I don't know.
Yeah,
but it
there is
might
a
be
debate about it. I've gotten comments back from a few people, and each of them have given me a different definition of what open source should be.
Maybe there's a way to summarize that.
So,
Just
yeah.
say,
I'm
we
gonna-
don't want to presume that there's one definition of open
Yeah.
source. I think that would be helpful. I also wanted to, you mentioned your intern Angie.
Yes.
And I'd love to have her last name so we can reflect and thank
It's,
her for it.
on the report, it's Angie Lee.
Oh, okay, great, perfect. And then the question that you had about maybe housing the development in the Department of Elections, Director Lawrence, you mentioned basically whether you have the time and the resources and the staff to do that. Do you have any other concerns about that, just from sort of like an independence type viewpoint? I guess what I'm thinking of is, I know that you strive to make sure that what your department does is clearly apolitical and can't be viewed as manipulating the process. Does that, if you were developing that internally, would that raise any of those issues for you, or do you feel like this is pretty much what you do anyway, so that doesn't raise those concerns?
I think the assertions would be made, but at some point in the process, they tend to be anyway. I mean, this election, someone would say we're on someone's side. It happens no matter what. But there's never any substance there. So no, I think for the department to get involved, I don't think there would be a substantiated opportunity even to state that we're trying to move things in a certain way, especially if the criteria of what we're working for was stated. There could be a disagreement about the manner by which we're trying to achieve a stated goal that's set in criteria. But as long as the criteria is set, then I think the department could probably hit the goal and the target.
It is one of the beauties of open source, that people can peer in and see that.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, if it were being done in-house, I'll actually add this to the report, because I just thought of it now as we're talking, you would need more staff, and the city would have to dedicate, you can't just say, we're gonna take the current staff and overwork them even more. You're gonna need to dedicate, kind of like how LA County did. They basically hired a team that is now working on this thing, and if that's what the county wants to do, I don't know how big the team would need to be here, but you would need to have somebody that would be dedicated to it. That would probably be someone that's separated from everything else going on in the department, because you can't build an open source system 6 months at a time, because you're 6 months on election, 6 months off, 6 months on election, 6 months off. You can't build a system competitively that way, so you would just need to have someone who's in-house, who's not dealing with any of the other election stuff that's actually the department's responsible for, but you would have to have someone who's dedicated just to that, or a team of people, however big that is.
And they may need to have skills or experience that the department doesn't
Yeah,
currently
I
have. That's
would-
something you could talk about with the director.
Yeah, no, I would definitely say that there would need to be some sort of specialized group of people that are within the department, but at the same time separated out from any of its normal duties, because you just need to have someone who's building it and not doing this every 6 months.
I gotta admit, I'm a little bit, the only thing that has really changed between this meeting and where I was yesterday, and being very open-minded to a lot of ideas, I think the practicality of time makes me shy away from us doing it in-house exclusively. I would be fine with us doing it in-house in conjunction with LA, adding our resources to their team. But I do have to say, with their timeline and how they've been operating and comparing that to when our drop dead date, I know that they're all very, very fuzzy numbers, essentially adding a math equation by just adding more variables as opposed to hard numbers. I'm really not convinced that with what LA is working with, that we could do more with less, and that would meet our timeline for replacing equipment. I would be very much on board if we could actually really work with LA, but I'm just getting kind of in my funny bone just to speak out loud my feelings. I think that's probably the one option I don't feel 100% comfortable with.
Yeah, I would just add, I'm not sure LA cares to partner with anyone right now. I think if you were to find a partner, you would have to go find another county that was interested in doing it, and just looking at what they've done and kind of starting from it. They really haven't, what they've done is they've spent a lot of time determining what is the voting booth experience going to be like. That's what most of their time has been spent up to this point in time. They haven't actually spent time developing the software, or I guess to the degree you want to call the hardware, what does the voting booth experience feel like? That's what they've done. They're just now getting to this phase where I think the city would actually want to get into, Not to say that we should ignore what the voting booth experience feels like, but they spent a lot of time doing that.
With that new information in light, I retract my comment.
Yeah, I just want to just respond to this because I've been following what Ollie's been doing pretty closely, and I would say that they did, it seems like they spent like 4 or 5 years just on kind of getting community feedback. And it's a huge jurisdiction. They've got so many stakeholders that I can see why it would be a long process.
But it may be optimistic to think that they're 2 to 3 years away. I mean, maybe it's
Yeah.
gonna be longer than that.
They only started the technical work like a year ago or so it's not.
Well, with the approval process, that assumes a pretty quick development of the software.
Yeah, I have to admit that these extra little tidbits, with all due respect, I do think we need to almost step back the entire conversation of what is open source, because I don't understand why we need a bunch of community feedback for open source to, what'd you say, it took like 2 years to do that?
Well, for like 4 or 5 years.
Well, what the first steps that they were doing had nothing to do with really open source at all. It wasn't open source that they were talking about. They were talking about, they had a really bad, well, I mean, my personal opinion, a really bad old system, and I think they kind of acknowledged that they had been hanging on to for years and years and years.
It sounds like their scope is much larger.
And their scope was like, we have I don't want to say they had a hanging Chad type ballot, but they had one of those old, I think it was an old punch card.
They do, yeah, they modified it.
They had a mod, so what they were trying to do is, okay, we know we have a bad system that doesn't work for anybody. There's like 100 different types of other systems that are out there. Which type of system works best? And they were trying to poll the general public as to what do you think is the better system to be using here? And they finally like narrowed down, okay, this is the type of system we're now moving. So now we're going to build a system that's going to fit into that category now that we know kind of what general category we're looking for. We're going to build this type of a system now rather than we have 20,000 different options of systems to build. They spent a lot of time to narrow down to what they thought was the best system for the people of LA County.
So rather, it's not quite the technical assumptions that I was assuming. It sounds like when you're saying it takes them X number of years to get where they are, it's not sounding like the same focus that we're talking about here.
Well, it's not our focus, but by the same token, knowing if the decision were made for San Francisco to develop its own system, you can't start writing that software until you know what you want. And that knowing what you want is going to require a lot of public input, and so we can't overlook the fact that that's a long process as well.
I would say you would need some public input. I don't think you need quite as long as they have. They have, I want to say almost 100 different jurisdictions that they're in charge of elections for, where we have one jurisdiction that we're in charge of election. Maybe if you want to count like school board or college board as a separate one, we have 3. But it's a much different scenario of what they have to deal with. I think we could get the public comment and all that period stuff to figure out, do you want touchscreen or this? You could probably get that done in a much quicker manner here than they did down there, just because of our side. We're 7 square miles. It's not rocket science here. It's much more complicated down there for them.
Yeah, leaving aside the complication, I don't know how strongly folks felt about it, but I will say that there's a lot of people in San Francisco who do feel very strongly about all of those issues. And so maybe, I don't know what this experience was in LA, leaving aside the number of jurisdictions. We don't want to do anything that would suggest not giving a full voice, because even we don't have a lot of public that come to our meetings, but this is the one issue that brings people out consistently, and so we don't want to overlook that, and we don't want to assume that it's going to be a quick process.
Can I ask something related to this? How much public feedback is there into just the normal RFP process when we're choosing a voting system? Do you have any, or no? Do you have like public demos at least, or?
Yeah.
Is that a selection criteria, the public demos?
Yeah, there's a pilot program that we have, yeah.
I mean, do you like collect public feedback and see what people, okay.
I have to ask, we're circling back to this question about what is open source, and not more or less a definition, but I really think expectation. I think, what would you suggest that be? Just as a starting point. Obviously people aren't going to agree, but if...
I'm not making a suggestion on that point. I will give you...
You're going to let us search in the dark on our own?
Yeah, I'm not going to let you... What I would say, I think that the Director Ernst actually brought up a good point. It's like, the question comes back is, what does the city and county want to do? Like, if it's going to build and own its own system on its own, what does it want to do with that system? Does it just want to give it completely free to anyone who asks for it? Or does it want to say, you know what, it cost us $10 million to produce, and we're gonna ask anyone who wants it to give us $1 million a piece because that will help us recoup our costs, and we think that, we base that on the fact that we think that we have 10 other jurisdictions or 9 other jurisdictions that want to pay for it, so we're gonna split it up equally amongst all of us, and that there's some sort of way for us to recoup some of our costs, which will be beneficial. If I were personally doing it, I think that would be the approach I would try and take. If we were doing it on our own personally, I think that there could be an argument made for the city, and this becomes much more difficult, much more lengthy, is going out to all the other counties and saying, how many of you want to come together and do a joint system? And how do we do it in a way where all of you are launching it together, and you kind of create maybe a JPA or some other group that's within the government structure system, and then that becomes the place where, if the director's worried about, in San Francisco's case, how do we get all of these temporary hires put in? We know the city's process can be tiresome and hard to do, and political winds change and all union contracts change, and all of a sudden it makes it hard for us to get staff. Perhaps then he's able to, through the JPA, contract with them, and they're the ones that go out and bring in all those temporary staffers to help run the system, and that helps address his concerns of what's going on here. Another county would go, we don't have that concern, we don't need to worry about it. They use the JPA in a different way that works for them, you said, but that's going to take time within itself to form. I mean, I work, my main focus of my job is working on the Clean Power SF program. Other jurisdictions have done those through community choice aggregation programs, have done, like Marin, they formed a JPA. It took them a while just to form the JPA in order to then get to launching of a program. And so you've got to build that into your time. I think what the director is talking about, you just need to have an idea is, if you need to go out, I would, if anyone were to ask me personally, I would say you're going to need to go out and have someone else come in and do a system for you, at least in the short term. The question is, how long of a contract are you really looking at? You don't want to box yourself into a 10, 20-year contract, because you probably don't need that amount of time beyond the 2017 cycle to really figure that, or 2016 cycle to figure that out. But is it really 2 or 3 years, or can you do a year to year, or can you do these things that give you the ability to bring someone else in, for the lack of a better term, one of the big 3, because that's probably who you're going to get, because they're the only ones certified in the state right now. Bring one of them in for some period of time while you're figuring out all these other details. And that's only if you want to go down if you're not going down the open source, then there might be a good reason to go with a 10-year contract or something longer. So I think that's something that needs to be figured out in the short term, so you can get that RFP put out there, so you know what you're looking for out of your vendors, and you're upfront with the vendors and say, this is what we're doing. Are you interested? And it may be that they come back and say, none of us want to see competition put out there, where none of us are going to bid on it. And then the question comes, what does the city and county do at that point? Does it abandon it and say, we'll give you a long-term contract, or does it say, we're going to figure something else out? Because if there's only 3 of them out there, they could all very easily talk to each other and say, don't bid. And it would be hard for anyone to track it down. And that's my conspiracy side of
Is it illegal?
Completely illegal in most cases. But they could just decide, what, it could be an individual thing where each of them decide, we don't want to, it's not worth the money and the effort, or we're going to charge so much that it's not worth the city and county's time, that they think that they're going to competitively bid and win, because they're going to charge so much more. And then you just don't, there's only 3 bidders that are out there, really.
That
And
would
correct me if I'm
require
wrong
the Board of
on that.
Supervisors to certainly give us the staff to build our own system.
And
But of course, that's being a big gamble that we can get that done.
yeah, I mean, there would be nothing better than if you're trying to build your own system, the deadline pressure would be there that by the end of 2016, you need to have something in place, because while there's no elections scheduled for 2017, thank you for voters for finally giving us 2017 off, you still have the potential of a special election, and you need to be ready and prepared, even if you don't plan on having an election, of having a system in place. And so there's, you got to figure out what's the marketplace looking like. Is the marketplace willing to give you short-term, extended lease contract type stuff that lets you get that, or is it nope? It's all or nothing. I don't know, and I'm not going to be the one to answer that question for you. That's not going to be part of my report in any way, shape, or form.
Short-term, how I'm weighing it in my head right now, I'm kind of leaning toward doing the short-term contract, and in the long-term, working with other jurisdictions, because even though that does require more time, hence why I don't think we'd be able to work with other jurisdictions, build our own system and get it implemented by the time we need it. 10 years, we're all gone in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And unless we start something that really has a lot of momentum, we're all moved on because of term limits, and I'm not 100% sure we would have the momentum to move on to another group that's going to continue it. But, 8 years for each, provided we don't get the
Do you
boot.
guys have term limits? How long you can serve on? Or is it
I'm
just
sorry,
your
10 years. I have 8 years.
Two
I'm
years.
completing a,
We have term limits, but we also have jurisdictional issues that really, we're not the ones who are gonna approve this or
Yeah.
not, that's the board of
Yeah.
supervisors. So we're here having a discussion, helping out with your report, getting feedback, but let's, also be aware that our jurisdiction
about
here
us.
true.
is limited, yeah, whether we're here or not really.
You can make requests, but you're not gonna be the ones that can decide if it gets.
I think we're, we try to keep ourselves educated a little bit, and so we have some input to provide, but
I am just seeing
we don't
that
get to say yes or no.
it's very easy, without us at least politely begging the supervisors, to very much see that if we don't take a real momentum to move toward no open source, that we're gonna be stuck in a cycle that we're never gonna break away from it. It's gonna be the big three for 10-year contracts forever and ever. I think there absolutely needs to be some move on our part to push for it. I'm okay with going for the long game, working with other groups. Maybe it takes a year to come up with a joint powers agreement, but one, if we do have other groups, I think there's more resources being pulled in. Two, even though it's a longer process, more groups are gonna want it, which is gonna make it easier to either give or sell cheap. I think that's a longer term game. I really wish the LA, since it has momentum, was more interested in working with us, but as Director Arndt says, we don't have forever to wait to replace the system, and I'm not going to sit around and wait for LA.
I think LA is so large on its own that it has enough of its own issues. I'm not sure that it would be in the best interest of San Francisco to partner with them. Because, yeah, you're dealing with one jurisdiction of LA County, but you're in all honesty also dealing with 100 different cities that are all demanding their own little things, and that can tie up the system in and of itself. Where San Francisco, if you were to partner, you partner with a few other local areas or that you already have good relationships with. I'm assuming that the director has good relationships with all the other Bay Area counties, or perhaps there's relationships with some other areas that are a little bit farther out. And that's the way you do more of a regional or Northern California type thing. Because the Southern California, I grew up in Southern California, there's just so much more that goes on down there that this makes it a lot harder to do.
I know that the smaller counties of NorCal, though, might have just a registrar of voters.
And that's they may decide that this is a good option for them. They can save, if it can show that it can save a little bit of money, they're gonna say, oh, we can save a little bit of money, and we also contract out with all these people. San Francisco in some ways is almost like a small jurisdiction, because, not in size wise, but as far as like, we're one jurisdiction where just as a lot of the rural counties, they don't really have cities that they have to deal with, it's just the county, and maybe there's one or two townships. But it's a much different, it's more of a San Francisco type feel to what they have to deal with, unlike LA County, which has, I don't know how many staff they have, but they've got a team of like 5 or 6 people that just work on this one item that have nothing to do with the rest of everything else.
They have buildings of staff,
Yeah,
literally.
Lucky them.
yeah, but they also have, they deal with probably just as much as far as elections goes as the rest of the state. I mean, it's something not quite, but probably about a quarter of the city's population of all the election stuff is dealt with just in LA County alone. And that deals with its own, I mean, that's one of the things though, if you go with a partnership, you're dealing with other people's headaches as well.
Yeah,
And everyone else deals with our headaches, which could mean some people don't want to be part of it.
What's everybody else thinking?
well, like it's being said, if the more people counties you involve into your effort, there's more stakeholders and it slows things down. But before we as a city make a decision like that, I think it would be important to at least see, maybe through an RFI or something, like how much would it cost for us to do it on our own if we were to pay like some kind of a company that could build something for us, and just to have some kind of a comparison before we decide that we need to work with 3 or 4 other counties.
That is a good point. There is certainly an interest in keeping it small. We don't want to get too big. Even if people are willing to join, they can come up the works. Knowing what the interest is, what the cost is.
Just to have a couple options kind of thing.
Only bring on the people that we essentially need to make the project supportable and survive. That so it makes it agile enough to make it done.
That's outside of my report, so.
Thinking out loud. I think you're very right about starting regionally, though. I do think the regional partners are large enough to be able to lend more substantial support, both in various opinions, because of their jurisdictions, as well as their financial resources and people power. I do think the smaller NorCal counties are more or less add-ons once you have momentum. Hey, the Bay Area has this idea, we're moving forward with it, would you like to join?
Do we have any other commissioner comment? I want to thank a member of the public for waiting so patiently. This has been a very long
Thank you.
discussion, and I see lots of notes, and I know you have a lot to say. So you're not required to, but if you'd like to introduce yourself, please do, and feel free to comment.
Good, my name is Brent Turner, and I'm here representing myself and also the California Association of Voting Officials. And I just wanted to say thanks to Jason and John and Chris and all of you for your comments on this. As Director Arntz knows, this has been going on for, I think we've been here with him for 8 years, and this work has been going on 12 years on the point of election system reform with open source software code. Of course, Richard Stallman started the open source movement earlier than that, and the good news is we've got a core team involved with Cabo that was there with Richard Stallman at the inception of open source. So we are abiding by some definition that will, I think, be helpful to the idea of open source, and wanted to mention foundationally that the open source initiative is the visible holder of the standard, and that standard, even though Director Arntz mentioned he didn't think general public license was a good idea, I think that upon further inspection by the good director, he might come to another conclusion, because the essence of the issue is that although it may not seem to be business as usual to share ideas, in this particular space, the idea is that business as usual is not appropriate, and in fact has created a failed situation nationally that has left us in a crisis nationally, in that the jurisdictions across the country have been put in a position where they are being, for lack of a better term, held hostage by the big three. And we've now come to a point where they don't have the money to keep paying the costs of these exorbitant systems, and they're not getting the service nor the product that they would desire. So speaking to jurisdictions nationally, it should be recognized that this is a moment of courage for San Francisco County, in that we are pioneering this. This doesn't come without extra work and extra effort, because the status quo, which would be preferred by the vendors and by the intellectual property lobbyist community, and even by perhaps the union representing the election officials, CACEO, they happen to share a lobbyist with Microsoft. So there's many different hats being worn, and we've, in trying to work out of this crisis, there has been a lot of attention paid to some of the issues that have been raised here today. And I think upon inspection, and even though it was beyond the report, upon further inspection, you'll find that a lot of this work has been done, for instance, regarding ballot printing systems, and that concept of the voter experience being press the candidate and have a perfectly printed ballot dispensed from a printer. That system was demonstrated in 2008. So we, at that point, actually gave that information to Los Angeles County, and they ignored it, and now have developed, through the $15 million sole source contract that was recently given to a company called IDO, they are coming back to that same design that was basically gifted to them however many years, 7 years ago. So that explains a little bit about the log jam that's occurring. Really, it's an issue of political will and lobbyist pressure, in my opinion. It's not that the technology doesn't exist, or that if we put in the effort that we couldn't accomplish this, certainly in San Francisco, which has all the great tech minds in the world located right here. It's really been that the lobbyists have been very heavy-handed on this, and that comes from the usual suspects, Microsoft, the vendors, and the intellectual property community. So you have to understand, open source is the enemy to Silicon Valley in that it's free software, and that throws a major wrench in their overall agenda of selling computer systems to the government. That being said, I think we all noted President Obama opened the government up to open source contracts, and hopefully everybody's been paying attention to the international effort here that open source is moving into governments in a lot of other countries. The United States has lagged behind, but we're very hopeful that in this moment we'll show some progress. I wanted to just hit some points.
Your time's up, so if you could keep it.
Okay.
You go ahead and hit some points, but keep it somewhat limited.
Okay. Ranked choice voting, speaking to Alameda County and Director Dupuy, he mentioned that he had spoken with Mr. Arnston, was taking more of a back seat and letting San Francisco lead on this, although he might want to be involved. That was Alameda County's position in the moment. Cabo, which I think when you're talking about a group that might be helpful putting all this together and working with the other counties, Cabo is positioned and created for that purpose, and we have currently 15 member counties. So we have designated in our first pass 15 counties that are to be considered as partners with San Francisco, although I appreciate your Commissioner Harris's comments that might gum up the speed. There are other counties that are in that critical moment where they would enjoy another option and be interested. The fact that we talk about the vendors conspiring and holding us hostage if we did go in an open source direction, I think that is compelling to moving forward with courage, because we've heard from, like Inyo County, California, from their contract with Dominion, that the comment was made by Steve Bennett that it might not go well for Inyo County if they started considering open source. So these kind of comments coming from the vendors are in poor taste, if not smacking of some other issue, and I don't think we should fall into that trap. The costs, when we talk about the difference between the two systems, I think the lessening costs moving toward open source are very compelling. We consider it to be probably 50% cost savings right now. That might increase. The licensing issue, when we talk about general public license, I would refer you to the open source initiative to sort of clean up that matter. The Los Angeles County and Travis County are both considering other licenses, particularly OPL, Open Public License, which is being put forth by a group called OSET, Open Source Election Technology. This license does not qualify as open source, and we take exception to the attempt to sell jurisdictions purported open source that does not qualify as open source per the standard holders, particularly Open Source Initiative. So there's much more to this story that I could go into. I don't want to take any more time, but I will conclude by saying the $18 million figure that OSET has put up there is like the $15 million figure that was captured by their sister company. OSET's sister company is IDEO, and the 15 million they picked up from LA was prima facie exorbitant. The $18 million figure that OSET is putting forth is prima facie exorbitant. A system could be created for San Francisco County for approximately $5 million, so a third, less than a third of that amount. And Brian Fox and people associated with Cabo are glad to get into that conversation with the county. This is an accomplishable situation. It is more an issue of political will. So if we have the courage to move it forward, it will fall into place. That I will say has been demonstrated. It's just a matter of taking the steps, and it's not without some transitional pain, but we have to be aware of the environment and that there are a lot of very big players that do not want to see open source voting systems come into place, because it is highlighting the efficiency of open source and highlighting the inefficiency of proprietary software, especially in this space. So I thank you for your time, and we're available to provide any information. By the way, we are the only group in the space that has been demonstrated on duty and working pro bono for the past decade. We have no financial agenda and no financial ties or interest in finance. We're only here to provide information on this point. So thank you.
Thank you, and I expect that this item will probably be on the agenda for the full commission in 2 weeks, so feel free to come and talk to the full commission then if you'd like as well.
Thank you.
As just a matter of housekeeping, I want to note for the record the document that Commissioner Jurgonik circulated at the commencement of this meeting is a 3-page document. Looks like it says amendment of the whole at the top, and then resolution number 494-11. And I'll ask Secretary Hewitt to include a copy of this in the public finder. Thank you, everybody. We're now adjourned. It is 7:18.
Thank you.